Hello friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I am going to be doing my wrap up and talking about everything that I read in the month of May. So I read 9 books, which is quite a lot for me. That is definitely above average, and they were on the whole pretty good books. And I am going to split up talking about them by book format. So I'm going to talk about the books that I do not have in physical format first, and then I will talk about the ones that I do have. But on the whole, this was a really enjoyable reading month and I got quite a bit done, so I'm really happy with it. So to start with, the lower rated of the 2 audiobooks that I listened to was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. And so this is a Jane Eyre retelling where we have the new to the neighborhood dog walker named Jane. That's not her real name though, but she is working for the clients in this really upscale neighborhood, and then she meets one of the men who lives there who is a widower whose wife, along with another wife in the neighborhood, died tragically in the past year, and so she starts to get to know this man and she starts to get closer to him, but there are definitely some secrets lying beneath the people in this neighborhood to uncover, and this is a Jane Eyre retelling, so I figure that anybody who has read that classic and knows the story knows what one of the wrinkles in this story is, and this is known throughout the whole book, but the fact that this man's wife is actually not in fact dead, but is being kept upstairs in their attic for reasons yet to be uncovered. And so this is sort of a mystery thriller romance. And I gave it 3 stars. I thought that it was fine. I wasn't crazy about the beginning of the book, and then from maybe the 30 to 40% mark until close to the end, I was starting to get really intrigued. I was enjoying myself, and then the ending happened and I liked the reveal, but I actually thought that it happened a little early, and then after that we kind of got things over-explained to the reader. So I kind of lost some of the mystique of the reveal, and some of the drama of the reveal left me. So I really liked it, and then I didn't like it as much at the very end, and it sort of just evened out to a 3-star because I would prefer to go back and read the actual Jane Eyre if I was looking for this storyline. It wasn't a bad book at all. It didn't do too much for me on either side of the spectrum. There were good parts though, and I would recommend it to people who like thrillers. It seems like a perfectly serviceable, perfectly good book. That was just fine for me. The second audiobook that I listened to, the higher rated of the 2, was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. And I actually did a whole video comparing Malibu Rising and The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, basically saying, why do I love one Taylor Jenkins Reid book so much, being 7 Husbands, and Malibu Rising was just okay for me. Why did that happen? What's the difference? Was it her approach? Was it the characters? Etc. So if you're interested in that, I did do a video on that, and there are some more in-depth thoughts of mine on Malibu Rising in that video. But Malibu Rising follows the story of 4 siblings, and they live in Malibu, and their parents were their mother passed away when they were younger, and their parents were her and one of the most famous men on the planet, and they are all basically famous in their own right. Well, not all of them, but they lead relatively famous lives as well. One of them is a famous surfer, the other is a famous model. And so these siblings, every year they have an end of summer party, and that party is happening tonight. So we follow the storyline basically in a period of 24 hours when this party happens, split with a timeline of their past and their parents' relationship, how they grew up. Basically everything happens at this party on this one night, and it's a culmination of their storyline up to that point. And so I liked it. I didn't feel strong positive emotions toward this book. None of the characters really captured me except for one. I really liked Nina and I really felt for her journey, but for the most part, this book just wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I had originally heard it billed as one big party where one night changes everything, and I was expecting it to be a very dramatic look at this one day, but it ended up having that split timeline where we got a lot of the past, we got a lot of emotionally charged things, and I just didn't feel like the day of the party or the night, like the day that we were focusing on in the present, was enough of a culmination for me to be satisfied with the resolution of all that history we got beforehand. And I think that's where it really fell short for me, was feeling that all of the characters' arcs had ended satisfactory or in a satisfying way for me. So yeah, I ended up giving the audiobook 3.5 stars, and Malibu Rising was a little bit of a disappointment after The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I can't lie about that, but it was still an okay book. It was fine. I don't have extremely negative things to say about it. So those are the 2 audiobooks that I listened to in the month of May. Neither of them were like extremely high ratings for me, but both of them were like enjoyable to listen to at the time that I was listening to them, and I'm glad that I read both of them. And I'm glad to move on from them as well. So next up is ebooks, which I also read 2 of, and the ratings for both of these were a little bit higher than the audiobooks. Actually, the audiobooks as a whole were my lowest rated format this month, so I guess I just didn't exactly get lucky. But the first book and the lower rated of the 2 that I read on ebook was Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill. So I gave this 4 stars and I really did enjoy it. I thought that it was a really solid first entry into the Bound and the Broken series, and Ryan Cahill is a self-published author, so if what I say about this sounds interesting, you should definitely go check it out, because I would love to see him get more support. So like I said, I gave Of Blood and Fire 4 stars. So this follows the story of Kaelin, Dan, and Rist, 3 friends, mostly Kaelin. He is our main character, from the very south of a continent where an empire rules and has ruled for a long time, and they rule with mages and dragons, and they have some very powerful tools at their disposal. But these boys are from the south, where the empire's reach isn't quite as strong, so they have lived sort of outside the main ruling arm of the empire, but we may have a chosen one among us. So our boys kind of get caught up in a situation where they don't exactly know what they're getting into, but they basically need to go on the run after getting involved in something that they didn't mean to get involved in. And on their travels with some very interesting people, they discover that this might be where they're meant to be, and one of them in particular. One of my favorite things about this book was actually the beginning, because we start out relatively slowly. We get to see some genuine interactions between our characters, their friends, their families, their village. We get to see them take their test to go on into officially becoming men. And then we kind of get to see them take a trip together, which is where things go awry. But the start of this book is definitely build up and definitely introduction to the world and how things work. But we do genuinely get to know our characters. And I really enjoyed that, because I really liked our characters. And this did allow me to form some connections to them before the plot really took off too much. So when the plot did start to advance in the second half of the book, I found it interesting, but I found it a little bit of a contrast, where now things were moving even a little bit fast for my taste, where we kind of lost our ability to slow down and be with the characters. So it was an interesting contrast in that sense, because I really liked that in the first half of the book, but I didn't think that it was quite as strong in the second half of the book, but I did have my leftover connections that I had built up, so I still cared about the characters and I was still able to enjoy the second half of the book. I just didn't think that it was quite as strong. So I don't have like a strong impact from this book, I would say. Like, this is a 4-star because I really enjoyed it, but it didn't make it past the 4-star level just because it doesn't have a lasting impact on me. Although I'm still definitely going to continue with the series and I'm excited to see where it goes. And one thing that I like about this is the title evokes dragons, and we're definitely advertised dragons, and we do get dragons in this book. And that's one thing that I'm happy about, because I know that sometimes when we're told that there's going to be dragons in a book, we don't actually get that many dragons. And I also really like the magic in this world. I can see definite influences from Wheel of Time, but that doesn't really bother me. It feels very classic fantasy vibes, like this whole book does. So I feel like it's more paying homage than it is just trying to like copy an idea. But it was kind of exciting to see those influences. And yeah, I think I just have generally positive things to say about Blood and Fire. And the other thing is that I did really like Ryan Cahill's writing style. It was really easy to read, but it was also nice to read, and it just flowed really well, and it made reading this book really easy. And it went by fast, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, definitely a solid 4-star. The second book that I read on Kindle was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And I've been looking forward to this book for quite some time, and this is one that has a lot of complex and heavy themes and is sort of hard to talk about for me in a way where I actually feel like I'm going to capture everything that it was trying to do, because it's having some pretty important conversations. So Kindred is about a Black woman named Dana in the year 1976, if I'm remembering correctly. And she, for reasons unclear to her, gets pulled back to the past to save this boy who is drowning. And she saves him, and then she is pulled back to the present. And she doesn't know why she was brought there. And when I first described the synopsis of this book, I said that she was saving a Black boy. And that was an assumption on my part because of the fact that you're told in the book that this boy is her ancestor, her family member. But in reality, this is actually a white boy that she is called back to save. And so it makes the situation very fraught with complexity and intense situations because of the fact that she doesn't understand why she is being called to save this white boy. She doesn't know who he is. At first, she does not know that he is her ancestor or related to her in any way. And she keeps getting called back to this time and place that it's very dangerous for her as a Black woman to be, because this is the antebellum South. This is the height of slave ownership in that area, and even though there are free Black people, it's a dangerous place for her to be. So the story continues from there, and I won't go into spoilers, but the themes in this one are really important because it is pretty sharp contrast in terms of she is a modern day woman, and being pulled back to this timeline really serves to highlight the differences between where society was versus where it is, and why people lived in these conditions or were so able to accept it without fighting back, and how easy it can be to find yourself caught up in a situation like this, and how hard it can be to try and positively influence the mind of a young boy who is growing up in a society that tells him that he can own people. And there's just so many conversations around slavery and race and the treatment of others and the struggles that slaves went through being told here. And Octavia Butler does it so well, and I really, really did love this book, even though it's not an enjoyable read at all times, because you're very aware of the fact that this is a heavy topic and that there are some tough things happening. So when I say that I loved it, it was more that it was just really well done. It's not as though you enjoy reading some of these things. And so I did give this 5 stars. I don't even know if I mentioned that, but I'm just really glad that this was my first experience with Octavia E. Butler and that I started with Kindred because it was fantastic. The themes were so good, and yeah, she did such a great job. So now it's time to move on to the books that I read physically, and there were 5 of those, and their ratings were pretty good too. I had 3 4 stars and 2 5 stars. So I am going to start with the 4 stars, and right after Kindred, here's another book that is a little bit hard to talk about, which is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. And so the reason this is hard to talk about is because the reading of this book almost kind of feels like a fever dream because of this kind of stream of consciousness way in which it's written. So this book follows Johnny, the title of this book, Johnny Appleseed, is a reference to like the Johnny Appleseed story. So it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek reference because Johnny is an indigenous boy or man, and he identifies as a man, but he identifies as indigiqueer, and he leads a very interesting life in the sense that he is living off of his original reservation. He's living in Winnipeg, and he's kind of struggling to find himself outside of the reservation in the city and away from his family. But this is told through a lot of memories and a lot of like vignettes about his life. So there are so many memories that are told in snippets throughout the chapters here, and there's not really a strong through-line plot. The overall plot is that his stepfather has passed away and he wants to return to the reservation to see his mother and to reunite with her. So that is what we're making our way towards during this book, and he is trying to make the money to do so, to actually get back to the reservation. But it's told through all of his memories to build a picture of his life, and give us an idea of what it was like to this point and who he is and how he feels and why he's trying to go back. So this was a really fascinating book, and I did give it 4 stars. And I enjoyed reading parts of it, and other parts of it were kind of tough to read. This was a very emotionally vulnerable book. It almost reads like a memoir, even though it's not one. And so the emotional vulnerability feels like you're reading it from a real person. And I'm assuming that there are a lot of real experiences drawn on here. And yeah, it was just really well done. It was pretty beautiful. So, and it didn't quite, I didn't quite enjoy the reading experience, and I think that's why it's 4 stars, but I really am fascinated by and respect what the book was doing, and I still did enjoy it, if that even makes sense. Then next up, we have my patron pick for the month of May, which was Cersei by Madeline Miller. And so this I gave 4 stars as well. And this was a really fascinating book. I read this while I was in my COVID isolation. And so I basically just blew straight through this, and I really, really enjoyed a lot of the stories that were told here. I didn't love the beginning as much, but I don't know how familiar everybody is with the myths of Cersei and the myths that make up this book. So this is one that's really interesting because even if I talk about what happens, it's not exactly spoilers because these Greek myths have been around forever, but I also just don't want to talk about spoilers. It's a weird dichotomy. But for me, the stories involving Cersei, for the most part, were like lesser known stories, like Greek myths that I didn't really know, or they interacted with Greek myths that I knew, but Cersei was part of those stories at a different point, not necessarily the most famous point of that person's story. Like, for example, she was involved in the birth of the Minotaur, and I know the story of the Minotaur, but for some reason I had never considered what had happened when the Minotaur was born, or how it was born and how it came to be. So it was really interesting to see a different perspective on that same story explored in this book. And that was, I think, throughout the book as a whole, what I really loved about it was my brain being able to connect these stories with stories that I knew. And I also really liked Cersei as a character. I liked her growth, and I liked the way that she found her strength. And at first she found her strength through cruelty, but then eventually she was able to find strength through gentleness and kindness, and was able to live a little bit more of a gentle life. And she had probably the happiest ending that a figure like her could have hoped for in her existence. So I ended up really enjoying this, especially the parts with Odysseus and his family. And yeah, I would say that Cersei just captured me. It didn't quite push itself over the edge to be a favorite, but for that, time will tell as well. Right now I'm comfortable with a 4-star, but if this continues to have an effect on me, then maybe I bump up my rating. My last 4-star read of the month of May was Warrior of the Wild by Trisha Levenseller, and this is a YA novel, Viking-inspired fantasy, but low fantasy. We are in a secondary world where at the age of 18, everyone goes through a trial for their chosen profession. And so our main character, Resmira, is going through her warrior trial. And if you don't pass your trial, then you are banished with basically an impossible task that you have to fulfill if you want to return to civilization. And so these tasks are deliberately made either very difficult or close to impossible, because it's supposed to be very difficult for your banishment to end, and essentially banishments are permanent. And I really enjoyed this. It was really fun. I loved the idea that banished people can band together as long as the assigned person is the one who completes the task. It doesn't matter how much help they get. And so I really enjoyed characters banding together and working together, like forming friendships, eventually forming trust, and being able to complete their tasks. And the one thing that I wasn't expecting was this twist that happens for how our main character gets banished. So at the start of the book, I thought that was really well done. I was genuinely shocked. And I won't give away like anything about what our main character's task is, but the way that she investigates and uncovers the best way to like attack her problem, I really enjoyed some of the mysteries that unraveled with that. I thought that that was really cool. So aside from that, like, this book didn't have too much of an impact on me, but I just had so much fun reading it, and I flew straight through it, that it was a strong 4-star for me. Okay, now it's time for the 5-star reads for the month. So first up, we have The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan, book 12 in the Wheel of Time, or well, I should say by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, because this is the first book that Sanderson came in to collaborate to finish the series after Robert Jordan's passing. And this was 5 stars. This was a fantastic book for me. I am going to be posting a spoiler chat for this very soon. I have that filmed, so I'm not gonna again go in too depth of my thoughts, because this is the 12th book in a series. Like, what am I gonna say about it? But a few things that I really liked were that this book had a great balance of character and plot for me. This has some of my favorite character moments in the entire series so far, and you can really see things starting to converge for the final hurrah of the series and how things are actually going to end. Because originally, these 3 books that Robert Jordan, that Sanderson took over to write, they were supposed to be 1 book, but it got so massive that it got split into 3 parts, and so this can be thought of as part of the final book. So of course you would be getting ready to close out the series. And you can really see that happening, and things are starting to get intense and heightened emotionally, and I really, really loved it. Finally, my last book, my last 5-star rating of the month, and my favorite book of the month, and possibly my favorite book of the year so far, is The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, which is the second book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which I am currently buddy reading with Ben and Ben. And this is, I don't even know what to say about this because there is so much to say about it, so much I could possibly say, but I just, like, I can't even fathom how much better these books are than Farseer for me, because I already really liked Farseer, and I already thought that Robin Hobb was a great author, but I genuinely think that this trilogy is going to be, like, damn near close to perfection, because the things that she does with the characters, all of their arcs and all of their growth, like, the characters are really the ones driving the plot forward. These are not characters that are dragged along with the plot and things are happening for plot reasons. Like, there is so many complex emotions, and the actions of the characters are really what causes things to happen. And I am, like, in the middle of Ship of Destiny at this point, and it is so good. And I don't know, like, I can't even say anything concrete because I don't want to spoil anything, but the concepts in here, like, there are a bunch of different storylines that are going to start coming together, and it's so well done. Like, and there are villains in here that are just some of the best villains that I've ever read because they are so real and tangible, and their villainy is, like, very human in nature. It's not over the top and evil. It's really just, like, things that people would do that are terrible. And our characters have gone through so much, and they're trying to overcome things, and it's so emotional. It's so good. I literally just can't recommend Live Ship Traders enough. And that is my final 5-star book of the month, and I couldn't have ended on a higher note because it's amazing. So that is it. That is everything that I read in the month of May 2022. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know some of the things, like, what was your favorite thing that you read in the month of May and what you think of what I read. Please like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and I have links to my Discord, socials, and Patreon down in the description as always, and I will see you in my next one. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye! Thank you to my latest patron, Shad Zaman.